So this one is by Revolutionary Thought. Uh, my understanding is that thought stands for that hoe over there, and I assume over there is on my computer screen. I'm assuming that hoe is this girl. No, I'm just kidding. I like Revolutionary Thought. She does just generally, I think, Marxist analysis of like modern society, in particular how capitalism like affects you from a both material and psychological perspective generally. And I think that her stuff is pretty good. So, this is a video by Revolutionary Thought. This is called "Is Capitalist Conditioning Destroying Your Life?" The answer is probably yes. Probably yes. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe she'll surprise me. Um, let's go ahead and start it.
Ancient scholar once said, "Revolution begins with yourself. An egg broken from the outside is food, broken from the inside, it's new life." And by ancient scholar, I mean a Chinese netizen like a few weeks ago, but my point still stands. If you want a revolution, you need to start within and revolutionize yourself first. Otherwise, you're just hoping for a rapture where the believers are saved and live happily ever after, and the non believers disappear. And that's just a recreation of the Christian mythos that
Yeah.
dominates so much of Western society and not an actual revolution.
The also quick side note, the rapture is like a non, it's not a real thing, right? It's not a real thing in the Bible. It's not a real thing in Christianity. If you go to Europe and you go to European Christians and you start talking about the rapture, they're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because no Christians outside of America have any concept of the rapture. My understanding is that the rapture, the general idea of the rapture, was popularized by a book series in like the early or like the late 80s or something, I think. And like most like most things in our version of Christianity in America, just slowly got zeitgeisted into popular religious culture until every Christian in America just kind of believed it. Same with like prosperity gospel and stuff. Like a lot of that like obviously has no real historical source or like any actual parallel in the Bible, but it just kind of, you know, gets just zeitgeisted into the culture of American Christianity uh, in a way that like I don't know. It's just funny to me. Like it's so funny. I always feel like America's versions of things are all just like the most like Hollywood or like TV coded like out of anything. Like they just take random things that they've seen on TV or I guess in this case like read in a book, even though I don't really think most of them probably read the books, but they take things like that and they're like that feels cool or that feels right, and then they embed that very deeply in their ideology like almost overnight, and they completely like warp and twist their previous notions of Christianity. Like I don't know, that's just a very this is a sidetrack, but a very like interesting thing to me of how America Christianity evolves and stuff. I also think that like the current like TikTok and stuff is kind of like gonna be the next version of Christianity as well. Like TikTok Christianity is gonna be, I think, the next evolution of American Christianity.
Evolutionary program. You can't just reach salvation through having all the best ideas. You have to actually be constructive and bring about material change. And to do that, you have to know who you are and what you have the capability of doing. Like, I too want to be liberated from this illegitimate Yankee regime by President insert leader of country here, but that's not going to happen. Revolution can't get exported like that, especially to the imperial core. It has to come from within. So, if some people could stop turning their Marxism into theology and recognize that the revolution starts within and then
Uh-huh.
act accordingly, that'd be great. And I don't mean this in a Jordan Peterson-esque clean your room before you critique the world type of way, where he basically says that you need to attain some peak enlightened state where everything in your life is perfectly in order before you can critique the systems.
What's going on with Jordan Peterson nowadays? Last I heard, he was about to die in a hospital. And I think they claimed they think it's like black mold or something, but my interpretation is that he's having a mental breakdown brought on by his like insane lifestyle and belief system or whatever. And they can't figure out what it is, so they're just claiming it's black mold. But which is also what I think is happening with J.K. Rowling as well. I think the black mold thing is usually just uh, people's internal contradictions, just kind of like reaching a boiling point for weak weak-minded people, basically. Um, but yeah, anyway, I'm curious what's going on with Jordan Peterson nowadays.
that you live under, which is advice that basically tells you to do nothing. I mean this in the exact opposite way. You have to do the internal work of revolutionizing yourself and how you treat yourself and other people so that your critique of the world can actually be transformed into action and into service to the collective, which also serves you. And that's what this video will be about. I'm going to discuss how the systems we live under influence and condition us, and how the macro system of capitalism reproduces itself in the micro, in our desires, beliefs, values, relationships, self-concepts, habits, pretty much everything, including gender, which is a topic we're really going to get into today. Then I'll talk about why transforming the conditioned parts of yourself is a necessary part of, and really a gateway to, revolution. You are really the only being you have full control over, so you must revolutionize yourself first. But attaining enlightenment and perfection is not the goal. Understanding who you are and the role you play in bringing about a better world and then doing something about it is. If you do not transform yourself, all your actions will be influenced by your unconscious capitalist conditioning and make you incredibly ineffective, and you probably don't want that. But before we dive into it, a word from today's sponsor. You know what I really hate? The fact for sponsoring this video.
My brother in Christ, the capitalism is within you. That's the title card.
The capitalist system is often framed as something that's out there, living in the world of production and commodities, but unfortunately, it's also within every individual that lives under it. I know, terrible, isn't it? As Karl Marx writes in the German Ideology, the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas, i.e., the class which is the ruling material force of society is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. Under capitalism, the private ownership of the means of production, private companies compete to maximize profits and gain the biggest market share. Capitalism's profit motive incentivizes the maximization of profits, and if your company can't do that, it won't last very long. But if your company is able to get a lot of profit, then the private owner of it could easily gain political power by buying up newspapers, funding NGOs and nonprofits friendly to their interests, funding political campaigns friendly to their interests, and the like. For example, Jeff Bezos is super rich from owning the massive monopoly that is Amazon, that he was able to buy Washington Post and make it spew pro-capitalist propaganda to influence
Yeah.
people into believing that the current order of things is natural and good.
Yeah, I've already said this, I guess, but like we're gonna see a lot more of this as well, of billionaires, particularly like I think Zionist aligned billionaires, like the Adelsons or whatever, buying up all of our major news sources and transforming them slowly but surely into mouthpieces of capital, essentially. Um, I do think that, the media, there's always an opposite reaction to that as well, though. Like, as the media becomes less and less uh, truthful, or, like, gets things wrong more and more, people will lose faith even more than they already have, which a lot of people have. And some right wingers turn to just like pseudoscience and mysticism because the media can no longer has any trust. If you're smarter, though, you're going to find independent sources like this beautiful girl right here, Revolutionary Thought, to give you better analysis of current events and stuff, or like just various independent news outlets that you do trust, that you can get that stuff. And it's important also that's why I do a lot of media critique sort of stuff. It is important to be able to recognize biases when you see them. Like, I do like to get a lot of firsthand reports and stuff from like the New York Times or the Washington Post or wherever, right? Um, but I like, and I'm not saying don't read those things because like that is where, a lot of the major news does come from in general. But you should always be able to like parse out the bias. Even if you've never read something before, you should be able to read it and kind of like get a general sense of what the bias of that article is. Like if you have a good enough understanding of media. So like I think that that's very important to people, which is why I do a lot of my media sort of, especially article reading and stuff on my channel.
because he benefits from it. Like, of course, he would buy a newspaper. It's only logical. Pretty much every single mainstream news media outlet in the US, and probably in the capitalist West in general, reports the news from a pro capitalist, pro imperialist perspective,
Hmm.
which isn't surprising because they're owned by private individuals like Jeff Bezos who benefit from capitalism. This is why the dominant ideas end up being the ideas of the ruling class. People who are against the capitalist ruling ideology that relies on
Like me.
exploitation of workers to function don't really have the capital and the political power to disseminate their ideas as far and wide as mainstream news media outlets can, or to enact material change by giving millions or even billions of dollars to causes or politicians friendly to their interests. Because under capitalism, gaining the capital needed to gain that much political power requires exploiting others. So if you're anti-exploitation, you won't get that sort of power. But if
Yep.
you're okay with exploitation, then the less you pay your employees, the more money for you. And
Yeah, under cap, I say it a little differently. I think a little bit easier to understand, but under capitalism, the more evil you are, the more successful you will be. That is the nature of the system that we have created for ourselves. The more evil you are, the more successful you will be. So it's not about intelligence. It's not about capability, although those things do, they do help by like not getting in the way. But the most important thing is like being as evil as possible is the way that you will succeed under capitalism. And to some extent, capitalists know this. A lot of the people who are capitalism conditioned, like, have you ever heard the phrase, it's a dog eat dog world out there? That is a justification of being brutal and being evil in order to, like, by just saying, oh, everyone's doing it, like, right? It's the system that we have. It's the like, and instead of being like, maybe our system shouldn't be that way, which is like my thoughts when I hear that, they just think, well, I guess I'll just be evil too, right? That's kind of how capitalism functions.
the more money for you, the more companies you can buy to keep accumulating more and more wealth and using some of that wealth to make sure you stay in that position. And the best way to do that isn't through violence, but through ideology. It's by convincing people that you're in this position because you deserve it and you're just like the best and smartest guy. I mean, not that capitalists are really opposed to using violence, but that looks kind of bad, so they prefer to change your mind first, I think. And that's basically the logic of capitalism. And basically, if you want to learn more about how this applies to newspapers and the media, read Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality. It's way better than Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent.
Whoa.
And that's why Parenti is the Chad and Chomsky is the Virgin. And all of this doesn't even get into how the US military partners with media companies to produce pro US military propaganda that they just call films, like Top Gun or whatever. And then these US military
Top Gun.
propaganda films are disseminated globally, which is probably really handy for making it so that countries with a US military presence don't feel.
Yeah, so this is also one of those things. I don't want anybody to ever get this mixed up in their heads. I am never saying don't consume these things. It's perfectly fine to consume American propaganda and even enjoy it to some extent as just a piece of art or whatever, right? Like you can go out and enjoy Top Gun. I don't give a shit. What you consume does not say anything about your ideology. But I do think that you should be able to analyze it from that perspective, and you should be able to, in your head, recognize and understand the biases and the what this film is doing and trying to do. And once you can do that, then you will have an inherent sort of barrier to being propagandized by that sort of stuff now and in the future. So like don't take this as like you should not be consuming this or you should not be consuming that. That's like old school woke scold shit. Like don't like that's not important. You should just have the critical thinking and understanding to be able to watch these things and like understand what they're trying to do.
Feel compelled to kick them out because these films portray them as good guys, because that's a condition of partnering with them on your film. Otherwise, they won't give you their stuff. Like, literally, so much of what we know to be common sense or part of the common ground has been shaped by the capitalist ruling class who control pretty much every aspect of how society runs. The term common ground basically just means the things we expect other people to know that they expect us to know. basically the implied set of propositions that are considered to be true during communication. In Elite Capture, Olufemi Otaiwo writes that common ground is just the informational aspect of the social environment that we build and rebuild with words and deeds. And when we successfully challenge the common ground, we are changing the social environment itself. In Marxist terms, the common ground can be thought of as the ideas and the things we view as factual within the superstructure that arises out of the capitalist economic base. The ruling capitalist class is able to maintain their cultural hegemony by essentially capturing this common ground in all the ways I outlined earlier, and more. That's why most Americans you talk to are going to be rabidly anti-communist, but won't be able to define what capitalism or communism actually are. They'll just be like, communism is when no iPhone, and capitalism is when commerce? No.
Yeah, that's a good point. The way that they do this is through media capture and money, essentially, as opposed to actual, you know, ideological victories in the marketplace of ideas or whatever. Which I think a lot of people have this misconception that there's an even playing field when it comes to the marketplace of ideas. It's obviously not. It is the entire quote unquote marketplace of ideas is dominated by billionaires like and like the amount of wealth and power that they can wield to shape media narratives and stuff. So it's really, I guess, impressive or whatever when the when anti-capitalist messaging finally starts to break through. It's really signaling a pretty big breakdown in the current media landscape, which I think we're kind of living through right now, but it will eventually, I think, get like much more as conditions worsen and as contradictions worsen.
Oh, Patrick, capitalism is not commerce. Mayonnaise is not an instrument. Anyway, all of this means that capitalist ideology is the water we swim in. We don't see it because it's always there, like the visual snow that I didn't realize I was seeing because I don't know, I didn't know that seeing static and floating worms in your eyeballs wasn't normal. Looks normal to me, it's always been there. Basically, the dominant ideology is the gravity sucking us in and the thing we move towards if we are not consciously aware of it and moving against it. If you do consciously move against it and move through the world as a revolutionary with the intention of bringing about a better world, that's how you can change the social environment and the common ground. But if you don't decide your intentions, they are simply decided for you by your unconscious conditioning. Your values, your desires, the things you find shameful, the parts of yourself you want to exile, even your relationships or ideas about things like gender or the nuclear family unit, all of that is unconsciously shaped by the ideology around you. And if you want to build a better world, you have to start by deconstructing how that dominant ideology shows up within you. You have to.
Yeah, a lot of these things are, man, I always look back and I mean, maybe there's a little bit of hindsight here or whatever, but like when I was younger, I always felt like there were these weird things that I didn't understand, like why people behaved the way they did or talked the way they did or you know, like I liked the things that they liked and like avoided certain topics or whatever. And I just think a lot of that is just this. Like when I was at like I don't know, a family event, which generally my family is pretty like Republican coded, except for like my mom, like honestly. But like the way just the general things that people talked about and avoided talking about, and all that sort of stuff. Uh, like what was considered okay or like you shouldn't be talking about this, like I don't know, it all kind of clicks when I hear her say things like this, and I always felt a vague uncomfortableness about it, like I don't understand why we behave this way or why we like why people say the same things, like why is everybody saying the same things, like when the Ferguson like uprisings happened, and like I think my grandma said something like, oh yeah, I mean I agree with what they're fighting for, I just don't like the way they do it or whatever, like, and then I heard like 30 other people like that I knew all say the exact same thing. I'm like, man, they're like, I didn't have the words to describe it, but like that's the kind of conditioning that people just have from living in our society and being pummeled with it from every angle, like by default.
To revolutionize yourself, including how you treat yourself and how you treat others. If you can't deconstruct how capitalism has shaped all these aspects of your life, you will unfortunately be doomed to recreate the patterns it has implanted into your unconscious self. But if you can deconstruct all that and revolutionize how you treat yourself and others, then you can move towards changing the common ground and the social environment and enacting material change and actually building a better world. And I don't just mean revolutionizing your opinion about foreign policy or civil liberties or actually existing socialist states or whatever, though. That's important too. I also mean revolutionizing everything that you thought was normal and natural, even the way you understand your own physical form and what it means to be a man or a woman or whatever. The way you understand what's normal, what's deviant, what's respectable, what's shameful. Unfortunately, capitalism doesn't just influence wages and production, it touches every single aspect of your life.
Hmm.
Because if the capitalist economic base gives rise to an ideological superstructure in which the dominant ideas are the ideas of the ruling class, then that means that capitalism shapes the categories through which you experience yourself. Even the ones you think of as natural. Especially the ones you think of as natural, like gender.
Gender. Uh-oh. We're about to get into some gender ideology, people. I hope you're ready.
In his 2021 book, Decentering Queer Theory, Communist Sexuality in the Flow During and After the Cold War, gender studies scholar Bogdan Popa discusses how Eastern European communism had a different view of gender and sexuality than the Western world and Western queer and feminist theory. Like, literally, even our conception of something that seems as universal as gender is rooted in capitalism and the Red Scare. I mean, I'm non-binary, I don't think of gender as universal, but a lot of people do and will crash out over the mere concept of transness or gender nonconformity, which, like, congrats to them for having capitalist brainworms that they haven't dealt with, I guess. And by congrats, I mean that's really embarrassing. Get good. And maybe watch the rest of
So
the video.
embarrassed.
In the Soviet dialectical conception, men and women were not given as a material embodiment that was fixed and unchanging. According to a Marxist logic, they were elements in a mode of production that had to abolish capitalism continuously. Rather than taking for granted the power of given cultural ideas, Eastern European Marxists were fascinated by the possibility that they could produce new social norms. Unlike Cold War gender, which seeks to explain the world and hide its normative assumptions, for Marxists, the communist artists and bodies were transforming and producing a new society. Unlike the capitalist West, the socialist Soviet Union glorified the process of laboring rather than the output of labor. And this concept extended to all aspects of life. People were defined by how they participated in the process of building a new world rather than by some fixed, unchanging identity. This also applied to Soviet conceptions of the physical form. Rather than acquiring a
This is all very complicated for people to understand if they are capitalism conditioned. That like the the way that your mentality would change and be entirely different, like society as a whole's mentality would be completely different if we didn't live under global capitalism, is like I don't even think it's possible for people to understand. Even revolutionary thought here, like I'm sure that she, is very far along in the process compared to like me or like even me or most other people, of being able to visualize and think about things in this way. But I think that there's a level of like we will never be able to understand the the way that we could think, like it's ununderstandable while we live under this system of production or whatever. In my opinion, unfortunately, I don't know if global capitalism is going anywhere anytime soon. But it is kind of a sad thing to think about that you might not be able to realize your true self or like who you would be or who you could be, uh, until until we lived under a different like mode of production. Like in my opinion, the like your who you are as a person under socialism would be much closer to like the I don't know platonic ideal of you as a person or your soul or whatever, if you want to get spiritual about it, than who you are as a person under capitalism.
gender identity, be that male or female, communist bodies were seen by socialists as unfinished and seeking to destroy a capitalist system. Much of our understanding of gender in the West is rooted in white colonial ideals of manhood and womanhood that intentionally sought to erase gender expansiveness through colonial violence. Even our conceptions of something as seemingly basic as man or woman is shaped by capitalist, white supremacist patriarchy and anti communism. Even the term gender itself, first coined by Cold War era psychologist and sexologist John Money in 1955.
Well, you have to think about where this really came from. Like, okay, so it obviously already existed in Europe or whatever, but I want to think about it more from just like the American perspective and like the like from America's founding, right? Um, the patriarchal system was necessitated by the system of colonizing and demonizing the other, right? Um, Things like concepts like protecting your woman or whatever, or protecting the white woman from the barbaric hordes of brown people, like or and children as well, and like things like to each person a castle, or like the castle doctrine of like people like this home is my castle and I am its king sort of stuff or whatever. Um, all of that was necessary for the expansion of the West in colonizing America and committing genocide against the indigenous people here. Um, so this is all like, and then I mean, obviously, expansion and growth and all that kind of relates back to capitalism, just like broadly as well. So, yeah, I don't know. There is a lot of interesting thoughts to be had here. Maybe that's why she's called Revolutionary Thought.
Was
Maybe it's
basically an
not that hoe
attempt
over
to
there.
clean up the incredibly messy category of biological sex and correct the presentation of intersex people. Not that intersex people need correcting, but John Money would disagree because he was kind of a piece of shit. More than kinda, honestly. During that time, and even before the 50s, scientists were quickly realizing that the category of biological sex was incredibly unstable and hard to define. So, Money coined the term gender specifically to create a new normal for people to adhere to. Money used the concept of gender as a tool to correct behaviors considered anomalous and to enforce norms pertaining to femininity, masculinity, and the nuclear family. And because it was the Cold War, of course, the concept of gender was deployed for Red Scare purposes. As Popa states, in a Cold War rhetoric, deviancy and race deficiency derive from the seductive nature of communism. If one achieves the right gender, one is fighting communism. If one does not, then the danger of becoming a communist is lurking in the shadows. Basically, if you weren't the perfect white masculine man or feminine woman performing the correct sort of labor role for your gender, you were considered deviant and therefore giving power to the communist threat. So if you're a trans communist, congrats, you're the most threatening slay. Shout out to
Uh,
you. So, like, even the way Westerners think about gender is weirdly rooted in anti communism. And even to this day, Western conservatives, for example, lump the threat of transness in with the threat of communism,
yeah, they do.
while Western liberals frame transness as an individual liberty that's impossible under communism and can only be attained in a Western liberal democracy. And those views
They're completely opposite. They have completely opposite ideology or like opposite like thoughts about trans people, but in both cases they find it to in some way be anti-communist or whatever. That's so funny.
may seem conflicting, but either way, anti communism is involved. Because that's one of the backbones of Western liberal ideology and Western conservative ideology, which is basically liberalism. You might be like,
It is.
RevThot, gender is cool and all, but what the does that have to do with anything?
Everybody's a liberal, dude. Conservatism is just another brand of liberalism. If you do not have economic policy that is not anti-capitalist, then you're basically a liberal. I know that like the conception of liberalism in America is like social liberalism with economic conservatism or whatever, um, and like conservatives are both economic and socially conservative, I guess, or whatever, right? But in reality, like it's just another brand of liberalism. Most conservatives, like neocons and stuff, are just liberals. The same with like neoliberals and stuff. They're all liberals. Everybody's a liberal. The only people who aren't liberal are anti-capitalist.
And if so, I'm so glad you asked. The fact that even something as seemingly universal and natural as gender is historically and culturally determined, and is even rooted in Cold War Red Scare propaganda in the West, shows us that revolution must include transforming how we understand our own bodies. Eastern European socialism had flaws because everything has flaws, but despite that, it still shows us that the way that we understand our own physical being is also part of the process of revolution. Revolutionizing yourself means revolutionizing your consciousness and revolutionizing how you move through the world and how you exist in your body. So when I say revolution begins within, I mean this literally. Like, even the categories you use to understand yourself are not neutral. They were built under specific historic conditions, and if you don't interrogate them, then you might fall into the trap of defending them as if they're natural and allow capitalist ideology to reproduce itself through you. And do you want that? Probably not. If you're a trans communist, though. Congrats.
I don't want that. Making the unconscious conscious. Gonna talk about some
If
unconscious
something as
biases.
natural as gender is shaped by our capitalist material conditions and the Cold War, what else lives within us without our knowledge? You know where I'm going with this. We have to talk about the unconscious. In Decentering Queer Theory, Popa also discusses how the Cold War influenced Western psychoanalysis by framing the unconscious as something untouched by capitalism rather than something that has a class character. When I'm talking about the unconscious, as I often do, I'm talking about how there is indeed a class character, and unless you become conscious of it, it will move you, and sometimes it'll be in a direction that's not good for you or the world. Like I said earlier, your conditioning is like gravity. It pulls you in, you move towards it if you're not aware. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And just because I have to mention this, I don't like Carl Jung the guy. He did my girl Sabina Spielrein dirty and was kind of a piece of shit, but his work is pretty useful. But anyway, your unconscious does not just exist in your brain. It's also situated in your body. It's in the frequency of your voice, your body language, the vibes you give off, your facial expression, all this stuff you probably don't even think about. Unless you're autistic, then you might be in a situation where you're forced to think about that sort of thing, and I really wish that didn't have to be a thing. Autistic masking is exhausting and drives you insane eventually. Don't ask me how I know. Your unconscious also includes all the patterns implanted in you over time that shape how you make decisions, how you react to conflict in the moment, how you respond to other people. It's patterns picked up from your parents, your friends, your teachers, the media you consume, your trauma, the information that exists in the common ground, and of course that means many of these patterns are the product of capitalist conditioning. Under white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, we are conditioned to view certain patterns as normal, even though they're pretty maladaptive, viewing other people as disposable or as potential competitors or as a stepping stone to better opportunities, believing that having the correct thoughts is all it takes to be a good person, and then refusing to believe anything that breaks your mental narrative of yourself as a good person. Individualizing systemic issues and blaming systemic problems on individual choices, glorifying the product of labor over.
That's a classic one. Like delegitimizing, delegitimizing like societal issues and saying everything is the individual. That's a classic one, especially in America, but in any capitalist society, is that there can be no systemic problems. Everything is of the individual or whatever. Like a lot of people buy into that, especially like including liberals.
Over the process of laboring, living in our heads and thinking of our bodies as machines that run on the logic and capital R reason of our brains, rather than understanding that we are embodied, emotional, intuitive beings with multiple ways of understanding the world. Believing in the narrative that there isn't enough for everyone to go around, so some people have to suffer for your comforts. And many more. How many can you name? But as Bogdan Popa writes, the Marxist ideology cannot appropriate a body for a communist revolution if the body is not committed to a deep transformative change. If you want to move towards revolution, you must commit to making a deep transformative change within yourself in which you replace the capitalist conditioning with something else, something new and better, something aligned with who you truly are and what your values are and with the better world that you want to bring about. You need to adopt a new way of viewing and interacting with the world and the people in it, including yourself. You can't simply adopt a new aesthetic with a cool hammer and sickle while recreating all the same patterns rooted in your capitalist conditioning. That'll just make you
True.
extremely ineffective and probably really annoying to others.
Very annoying. Very, very, very annoying. If you I would just argue with people to just don't overdo it on your aesthetic changes as you transition from normie to lefty. Like, lots of people go through this process, and of deconstructing their biases and eventually coming out, uh, a little bit more left leaning to some extent or whatever. But they go a little bit overboard with aesthetics um, and also critiques of others, purity sort of ideas and like that sort of stuff. I would just argue that people just like take it down a notch. Like it'll be okay. Like you can, like you still need to be able to be around other people and not annoy the shit out of them, like just generally. Okay, so that's just my little piece of advice to everybody.
Other people. For example, I have encountered so-called self-proclaimed Marxists and leftists that will resort to using bigoted slurs or engaging in bigoted behavior
Oof.
when they're triggered. Oh, cool. So there's a part of you that still thinks it's cool to be a bigot, even though you claim to be for the liberation of all people. Doubt. Literally, okay, this is a tangent, but it's like self-proclaimed Marxists saying the R slur and being like, it's liberal identity politics to care about an ableist slur that's been used to
Uh-oh.
institutionalize and kill disabled people. Ha ha ha.
She might be talking to me a little bit. I might be a little loosey goosey with my language sometimes, which I'm trying to get better at. But I also am a little bit of a like I don't know. This is a hard thing for me, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But I also do sometimes think that it can be a little bit of a distraction to focus so much on language as opposed to actual substance. But I'm a human. I make mistakes, so I'm learning. I'm learning.
No, no, it's not actually. It's common courtesy. It's grace. It's respecting others.
I don't use it, but I think I don't use it like they use it probably. I use it like I have used it in the past to uh, describe, like, for instance, like Jeffrey Epstein or whatever, who I do think had a mental disability, or at the very least was um, dyslexic or something. But I probably still shouldn't use the term even in that case. So even if he was one of the potentially the worst person to ever exist.
And when they say, that's a hurtful word, don't use it, perhaps come up with a different word. It's not that hard. It just drives
Yeah.
me bonkers.
I'll use mentally handicapped next time. I won't use the R word. I'm sorry, Revolutionary Thought. I think Jeffrey Epstein was mentally handicapped. I don't think he was the R word.
I've also encountered so-called self-proclaimed Marxists and leftists who don't care about having a dialectical discussion to come to an understanding of the truth or about, like, actually doing anything good in the real world because they prefer to be the most correct and specialist boys with the best ideas and then disparage others for not having their same best ideas. Whatever that means, because it's not like they're really doing anything by having the best ideas. Like, the way these people treat others is still very much rooted in capitalist conditioning that sees other people as potential competitors or antagonistic or as stepping stones rather than as potential comrades. The way you treat the collective is the way you treat yourself, so those people also hate themselves. They also tend to view conflict as something that's inherently bad and antagonistic rather than something that can be handled with grace and used to generate better outcomes. You can't have progress without friction, but friction for friction's sake does not automatically generate progress. And I'm not even saying this as someone who's, like, so enlightened and above everyone, but just as someone who's fallen into this same trap before and spent the better part of a year just, like, raging at and attacking other leftists on the internet for not having the correct ideas or sharing things by problematic people and thinking that that was praxis, which was extremely goofy and cringe of me. I thought I adopted the correct ideas in my mind after reading all the theory, but I didn't actually let them change me for the—
Look, we're all growing, right? We're all growing as people. We're all learning all the time. And I know that some people, they go through this phase, especially as they they are in a pretty big transition in their life of breaking out of capitalist conditioning, right? And everybody kind of goes through that to some extent or another in different ways. Uh, but like I said, just try not to be too annoying about it. That's the best advice I can get. We need everybody on board, and we don't need people getting alienated by, a lack of communication or, getting a little too hyper focused on always talking about the same thing over and over again.
Better and put those ideas into practice and revolutionize how I treat others and myself. Because I was still running off of capitalist conditioning for myself. Instead, I tried to change everyone else around me, and then I got really frustrated when that didn't work, even though, like, duh, if you're an insufferable asshole who acts like you know better than others, you're gonna be extremely ineffective. As an individual, you have the power to impact the world, but you do so by moving yourself and your own physical form.
One thing that you also have to understand is that you will need to be able to put yourself in the headspace of a capitalist or of a liberal. If you ever want to have any hope of being an effective communicator with people, like as a leftist or as a socialist or as a communist or whatever, right? You have to be able to like put yourself into that perspective. Like this is unfortunately just the lot of like trying to change the world for good. Like when you are going against like, you know, trillions of dollars of money and conditioning being waged against you or whatever. But you have to be able to put yourself in that position and then talk to them in a way that you think would be effective to someone who is in that headspace. Because if you just go right into, I don't know, the Marxist theory of value or whatever, like right off the bat, when the person doesn't even know like the definition of socialism. Like most Americans don't know the definition of socialism. They just think most people, if they hear the word socialism, just think social democracy. Like so like if you do that, it's not going to be an effective communication strategy, and it likely will come off as pretentious and annoying. So you need to be able to put yourself in other shoes if you want to be an effective communicator on this issue. I like to think that I'm doing an okay job here, but I'm sure that even I sometimes am a little bit too like wordy or a little bit too like theoretical and like stuff, and um, even on my channel when I talk about these things. So yeah.
Your body is the vehicle.
Although my channel is probably more geared towards people who have an already somewhat understanding of leftism as like just broadly left politics as a concept or whatever. So I hope that it all depends what audience you're speaking to.
Through which you perceive and influence reality. Because of your personal physical form, you have a particular experience in the world that influences how you perceive and interact with the world. But if you don't let your ideology transform your physical form, you will continue repeatedly falling into the same negative patterns. You also can't control anyone except yourself, so any changes you make have to start with the self first. I've said this like a million times because that's the point of the video. And then you can set a good example and other people will see it and hopefully want to follow. But you can't get people on your side by being miserable and off-putting. I mean, right-wingers do that all the time, but they have like a lot of money. And yes, the world is a terrible and hostile place where terrible things continuously happen, like imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, like literally the worst thing ever. But you need to maintain revolutionary optimism in the face of hopelessness and set a good example for others by doing so. Because despair is what the powers that be want us to fall into. They want us to think that changing things for the better is impossible, that this is just the way things are. If you're still with me, you might be wondering what all this means in practical terms. I mean, contemplate the ways that capitalist conditioning shows up in you. Be conscious and mindful
I'm
of
sure
when you
there's
are
some like yeah, I'm sure there's plenty. I'm sure if some, ultra leftist comes and watches any of my content, they'll see tons of capitalist conditioning. I'm sure that I am not even anywhere near, breaking out of that like entirely or whatever. And I think to some extent nobody uh is able to break out of that as long as you live under capitalism. Um, but yeah, I'm doing my best here. I'm doing my best.
falling into these patterns, and try to break out of that loop if you can. Learn how to navigate conflict in a generative way. Treat yourself and other people with respect and dignity. Learn about who you are and what your unique skills and talents are so that you may contribute them to serve the collective. And then actually do what you can to change the world for the better. There is a dialectical relationship between the individual and the collective, and to serve yourself, you must serve the collective. Capitalism has incorrectly framed the individual and the collective as forces that are at odds with each other, but that's not true. The individual is a part of the collective whole. The collective whole is made up of individuals. Socialism aims to bring about a system in which the success of the individual is the success of the collective and vice versa. All genuine knowledge comes from social practice, so practice being the type of person the revolution will bring so that you can be the person who helps further the process of revolution now. And it's going to be messy and imperfect, and you're going to fail sometimes, and guess what? That's how you learn. That's social practice. But sucking at something is the first step to being kind of good at something, and perfection is a direction.
True. 3. Conclusion. There it is. Conclusion.
In conclusion, the revolution does not arrive as an external force that saves you. You, the revolutionary, must become the person who builds it. You must be the person who is willing to create a new order of things, and that starts with revolutionizing everything about yourself. Self-development also shouldn't be about individual success, but about the pursuit of collective liberation. Individual transformation doesn't replace collective struggle, but is a necessary part of collective struggle. But yeah, revolution is not a single rapture event that will solve everything. It's a long and uncomfortable
Yeah.
process of transformation.
And there's no there yeah, the revolution is a process. It is not an outcome or whatever. Is like when we think of revolutions historically, we often think of it as one big thing that then after it was done was completed or whatever. But revolutions are never completed. They like even if we get some sort of like radical restructuring of society in America to like at best I would say we could get like a more like social democratic like society. Um, the struggle is ongoing. Like the powers that be will be right there, ready to constantly destabilize and dismantle the systems of equality that we try to create. So, yeah, that is one thing to always remember. It's not some magical event that just will like everything will be solved after the revolution or whatever. Like, yeah, and revolution can also there's gradations of it as well. Like sometimes it's like for instance like the civil rights movement is like was a revolutionary struggle. We don't often think about it that way or are taught about it that way, because there wasn't some big war or some big uprising or what like or like not some uh, like I guess violent uprising, I guess, even though there was violence in the civil rights movement. Um, but like, yeah, there's also gradations of what we consider like revolution as well.
As Ismatu Gwendolyn says, to call for revolution is to call for death. But it is also a process of building something new. And it all starts from within by cultivating the parts of you that can serve the collective whole. To serve yourself, not just to make your own life better, but to make things better for all oppressed people worldwide. Thanks for watching. This video was made possible by my
Thank you.
amazing
Thank you, Revolutionary Thought. Go check her out. I mean, here, let me bring this up full. Go check her out. There's her Patreon. She does great stuff, I think. She helps me, I think, grow in general. Or I guess they, sorry, I don't know for sure what their pronouns are. But yeah, check her out. I enjoyed that video. She even called me out a couple times. Which I do. I gotta, everybody has growth opportunities, and I'm no different. So, you know what? I think that's probably about it, people. It's been about 2 hours. This has been an educational stream for the peeps. I'll probably go ahead and clip these because I didn't just do one video this time. Usually if I just do a single video for these educational streams, then I'll just leave it in the live, like on the live section and not bother clipping it because it's like, what's the point? But since there's two separate ones, I might still clip these tomorrow so people can watch them, but they'll be like hour long, essentially hour long videos, but